Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day-to-day lives. Let's start with the video. My wife, 33, female, and I, 35, male, have been married to each other for the last 10 years. We have a beautiful 9-year-old son and for the most part, a good marriage. Recently, I guess for a year or so, I've noticed that my wife has started to become distant. We haven't had any fights and there have been no other major issues. But when you have been married to someone for this long, you begin to notice even the smallest of changes. It started with my wife complaining about pretty much everything I was doing. She didn't like the fact that I go golfing with my work buddies sometimes, and she started saying I don't spend enough time with our son, even though I try my hardest to be involved in everything he does. She also started to say that I should help her around the house more often. This is, of course, a reasonable request, but my wife is a stay-at-home mom by choice. And before we had our son, we had already discussed that she would take care of most of the housework. I still help out with things as often as I can, but I work long hours, and except for the weekends, it isn't possible for me to come back from work and play with my son so my wife gets some time to herself and help out with the housework. I don't know if she has always resented these things or not, but she has only started complaining about them recently. My wife is also in therapy for anxiety and some other issues. I won't get into the details as to why she goes to therapy, but she has been seeing a doctor for around a year and a half now and says that it makes her feel better. I don't really believe in therapy, but I completely supported her decision to take it. Initially, it was normal and she started looking genuinely happier, which in turn made me happy. She told me that she understood things better thanks to therapy, which I thought was a great thing. But I guess you can never really predict when a seemingly nice thing can turn into something utterly destructive. In this case, it was my marriage that got destroyed. But I am hardly a person who would sit by and be wronged, which is why I retaliated the way that I did. But we'll come to that later. As I have already said, my fiancée started to change quite a bit after she started seeing her therapist. I thought it was normal and that I'll adjust to it in time, but that's when the complaining started. It felt like nothing I did made her happy despite my best efforts. I was really confused and tried to talk to her multiple times, hoping to understand what had happened all of a sudden that made her so unhappy. But she kept telling me this was how she really felt all along, and that she refused to hide her true feelings. This was a blow to me, if I'm being honest. I am not the perfect husband, I admit, but I've tried my best to give her and our children everything I possibly can. Things were starting to get quite hostile and uncomfortable in the house when I came back from work one day and saw that neither my wife nor my kid was around. I didn't know my wife had any plans, so I called her to ask where she was, but she didn't pick up. I went to the bedroom to change out of my work clothes, and that's when I saw a letter on the bed. Intrigued, I picked it up, and it was in my wife's handwriting. The letter said that she was tired of living in a loveless marriage with someone who never made her feel appreciated, and that she is leaving and taking our child. She also wrote that she wants a divorce and that she's willing to share custody if that's what I would like. The letter also went on to say that she never knew what she was missing out on until she met a man who is everything I could never be and who would do anything for her. For the first few moments, I was numb. My marriage was over, and my wife had apparently found a mysterious new lover. After a while, though, I knew I needed to get things sorted. I wanted my kid back. The first thing I did was to call my wife, but she didn't pick up as expected. The next thing I did was to call my sister-in-law because I knew that my wife tells her everything. She picked up but didn't want to tell me anything, so I had to say that I'll go to the police if I don't get my son back. This had the desired effect. My sister-in-law begged me to give her some time to talk to my wife and promised to call me back as soon as possible. Sure enough, after 15 minutes of waiting in agony, I got a call. But instead of my sister-in-law, it was my wife. She told me not to be ridiculous by going to the police and that she never said I couldn't see our son. I told her that she was the only one being ridiculous here and demanded to know who this man was for whom she was willing to throw away 8 years of marriage. She didn't want to say anything at first, but after I threatened police action again, she confessed and said that her lover was none other than her own therapist. She said that he had made her realize what a terrible husband I am and that she deserves better. She then proceeded to tell me that I could see our son whenever I want and not to get the police involved, and hung up. You can imagine the horror I felt after that whole conversation. Here I was trying my best to adjust to my wife's changing behavior while she was there getting manipulated by some hack. The worst part was that I literally paid for every session she had with that man, and this was what I got in return. Life can sure be cruel sometimes. For the first few days, I was devastated, but then I began to think of my big revenge. I obviously thought a lot about what happened, but one day it suddenly hit me that what the doctor had done was highly unethical in multiple ways. I didn't know if it was illegal or not, but I figured that, at the very least, he could lose his license. Let's see how he reacts to a medical malpractice suit against him. AITA for wanting to sue my wife's lover and former therapist? Update 1. I reached out to a liability attorney who confirmed that I had a strong case of medical malpractice. Apparently, this can cause a lot of damage to the man and permanently get his license revoked. Sounds fantastic to me as far as I'm concerned. Meanwhile, I reached out to my wife again, but she refused to be reasonable and leave him. I obviously didn't even hint at my plan, but I thought I'll give my wife another chance for the sake of my son. But seems like she'll just have to face the music now. For the last few weeks, my excellent lawyer has been working out the legal aspects of the whole thing, and tomorrow we are officially serving him the papers. Update 2. Guess who is now begging for my forgiveness? I wish I could describe in words the satisfaction of hearing a man who stole your wife plead for your forgiveness. Music to my ears, truly. He confessed that he was sexually attracted to my wife and knew that she was unhappy in our marriage. Instead of helping her, he decided to convince her that I was to be blamed for everything so she would get fed up and leave me. He begged me not to sue him, saying that he will lose everything if that happens. He went as far as to say that he will leave the city and never contact my wife again if I choose not to take the case forward. I have no interest in his self-apologies, though. Not only am I determined to drag him to court and lose everything, but I am also even considering leaving an anonymous tip at our local TV network about a doctor who is sleeping with patients. As for my wife, she's obviously furious and calling me hateful and bitter. In our last phone call, she told me that I've always been petty and that she should have left me sooner. I'm quite preoccupied with the malfunction case, but after all, this is done, and I successfully destroy the man. I am fully intent on taking my wife to court and getting full custody of our son. Update 3. It has been 4 months since my post, and this is the last update I'll make probably. Things are going exactly according to plan. The final hearing is yet to come, but my wife's lover has a suspended license which will most likely be revoked as soon as the judgment is out. I did end up going to the media, and let's just say that it caused a huge scandal in our little town. I had totally forgotten about this post, but something delightful happened last night, which made me think that I should probably write an update for you all to enjoy. My wife showed up at my house begging me to forgive her. I guess she can see where this is going. She said that she had left her therapist and that the whole thing was a huge mistake. But here's where things get interesting. Until now, my wife had refused to admit that her therapist had manipulated her into their relationship, but she told me that if I forgave her, she would go to court and take my side. I guess she was hoping this will make me forgive her, but I laughed at her face, saying that the fact that she can't stay loyal to any man, either me or the other guy, is disappointing. I told her that I have no interest in being with her again, and that if it weren't for our son, I'd never see her again. She left the house looking highly offended and in tears. NTA. What you did was absolutely correct, OP. Your wife's former therapist is an abuser, and your wife is actually a victim. As a doctor myself, it's sickening to think that some people would have relationships with their own patients. There are no words to describe how immoral and unethical it is, and he deserves everything that has happened to him. There should be stricter punishment for sickos like him, in my opinion. NTA, but don't be too hard on your wife. I admit that it was 100% wrong for your wife to cheat on you, but you have to consider that she was in a really vulnerable position. That guy was a professional who brainwashed her into getting what he wanted at a time when your wife had her guard down. I'm not saying that you have to get back together with her, but maybe consider being a bit kinder. What you did to that man, though, is absolutely justified. I love the added pettiness of going to the media and exposing him publicly. Next story. I am a widow who, from my previous marriage, has two daughters, a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old. I remarried 2 years ago to a divorcee who has a 10-year-old daughter after dating him for 4 years. We met through our younger girls, both doing swimming. This isn't a case of me splitting up from his ex-wife, as I know some will likely ask that. Things with his ex-wife have been cordial, though not particularly warm. He moved into my house and I converted my office into a bedroom for her for when she visited, so she'd have her own room and set up an office space in our bedroom instead. My daughters love their stepsister and treat her just like another sister. My youngest and her especially get on as they are already friends. I recently got offered a promotion, which would mean we'd need to move to the city, which is more expensive. We'll be selling the current home to fund this, but based on our current savings and the money we'd get from the sale, the only houses in our price range are 3 bedrooms. Not ideal, but we can make it work. The plan was for me and my husband to share one room, my oldest daughter to have her own room, and my youngest daughter to share a room with her stepsister. They'd also get one of the larger rooms. When his ex-wife was dropping her off, we filled her in on the plans and properties we'd been looking at to keep her up to date. After all, her kid would be staying with us sometimes. She has a right to be kept informed of this matter, but she did not like the fact that her daughter would have to share a room as she'd never done that before. I tried to assure her it'd be fine, that the girls get on well and they'd have a larger room to prevent squabbling over space. She was still not happy about this and told me, if anything, my daughter should share and leave a room free for her daughter. I told her my teenage daughter wasn't going to share a room with her little sister and leave a room free for whenever my stepdaughter came to stay, that my daughters will be the one living in the house full time, so they need their own space. My husband added here that really that wasn't a fair request, and at least the two younger ones are friends. She insists we should get a mortgage to pay for a bigger place if our savings and the sale can't give us enough money to buy somewhere big enough. Now, this could be an option, but neither of us is keen on starting out with debt, and I personally feel that that is none of her business. We fought more until finally I told her to get over herself, that it wasn't like I was making her daughter sleep on the couch or putting her in with a much older kid or one that her daughter couldn't stand. That to the younger kids, it'd just be like a sleepover. Hell, even with their own rooms, they sometimes do this. Maybe I'm the a-hole for snapping, but I just reacted at her continual pushing. My husband understands why I did this, but says maybe I went too hard, too fast. I hate that I may make things more awkward in the future through this. NaH. Going against the grain, while I don't think you're an a-hole, I understand what the ex is getting at. You didn't specify how often the stepdaughter is over, but some commenters are saying since she isn't full-time, it'll be like a sleepover when she does. Therein lies the problem. I'd be concerned with the stepdaughter feeling less like this new house is also her home. Her parents are divorced, so her mom's house and her dad's house should feel like home as much as possible. To that end, how you approach the design of the shared room is really important. Stepdaughter needs her own space and does not feel like she's a visitor in your younger daughter's room. Stepdaughter has her own bed and own desk. Stepdaughter being able to paint and decorate her space how she chooses. Stepdaughter having her own dresser, which is off limits to your kids. Some parents have been able to add partitions and or use a bunk bed to define separate spaces for each child. I saw a room design where it was in the middle of the room, walls were added so top bunk got one side of the room and bottom bunk got the other. Both kids had their own desks and an archway connected both sides. Without partitions, you could also consider 2 raised beds with a desk underneath and putting them on opposite sides of the room with a shared open space to play in between. I'd caution against just a regular bunk bed because it'll feel like the younger daughter's room and the stepdaughter just bunks there during visitation. NTA. If she wants you to have a bigger house for the sole purpose of sometimes housing her daughter, then maybe she should offer to pay for it. Next story. I, female, 31, am currently engaged to my fiancé, Caleb, male, 34. We're planning on getting married soon, but his 13-year-old son got diagnosed with a medical condition that will require months of treatment. He'll be receiving treatment next month. Caleb and I chose and agreed on a wedding date. I found out recently that he decided to change it. I was so confused, especially when I heard it from one of his friends. I asked him about it and he said it was true he wanted to change the wedding date and gave the reasons. A. Because he wants to focus on his son and his recovery and give him enough time to get his health back. B. He wants his son to be at the wedding looking healthy and happy. C. Doesn't want his son exposed to a large crowd while recovering, so he thought the best decision was to put off plans for the wedding till months later. I felt upset and couldn't help but start arguing with him and objecting to this decision. He argued that I'm being selfish and short-sighted and that I clearly don't care about his son like I say I do. I told him he was being unfair and treating me as if I'm happy with these unfortunate circumstances, although me and my family have been more than supportive. He told me that if what I'm saying is true, then I should be on road with this decision. I thought that was illogical because now I'll have to go look for other venues and make other arrangements because wedding reservations need strict timing and planning ahead of time. He snapped and said that clearly a wedding is more important for me than my stepson's health. But I disagreed and explained that his son can still attend while he's on treatment, but he was having none of it. We had a fight and he went out. His family think he's being reasonable and there's no need to rush, but I feel like my opinions and thoughts were stomped on and ignored because he knows I have a specific date on mind that is special to me. And if I agree to postpone, then I won't get the same date unless I wait another year. AITA for my reaction? Did he present a valid argument? YTA. I understand your feelings since he didn't include you on planning and you had to learn from someone else, but his kid is sick, and that is and should be his only focus right now. If as his father, he feels delaying is best to ensure that his kid is better, can participate, and the focus is on him, a loving fiancé would love her family so much that she would let her disappointment be silent and show full support. Your concern is about your special date and your plans and your venue. YTA fully. Had you asked if you were a jerk because quietly upset, I would say NTA. But based on your words, it's about you and your desires only. ESH. He should have talked to you about changing the date. The fact that he didn't, regardless of why he wanted to, is a red flag. You shouldn't have heard about it from a friend. He has good reasons to change the date. You need to understand this. Talk to him and discuss the new date, whether it be a few months or a year. Let him know that he needs to communicate with you about any other changes to the wedding or any other big decision he needs to make. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.